Right. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you're all there. You can see the little ticker tape counting you all in. So without further ado, let's get cracking. I'm Steve Smedley. Welcome to our fourth autumn webinar that basically aim to pick up on white paper themes and other topical themes. In this case, we're taking a further look at the TSMs, what used to be called the consumer metrics, following last week's session with the regulator. The focus this time, though, is very much on surveys and their essential role in gathering intel. And funnily enough, I've just come to this webinar from a meeting with the regulator where they were flagging up the customer intel is just how important it was, and that the sector's been on a bit of a journey the last few years, getting decent intel in terms of their stock, if you like, getting to really know your stock. There's a general sense, particularly amongst, I think, the bigger associations, that there's even more work to do there in terms of getting to know their customers. So that's the focus this time, get your surveys right. So I'd also like to welcome Denise Rain from Acuity. Many of you will know her. She's going to be taking a practical look at getting your surveys right, how they've evolved over the past year not being a typical year, what kind of questions and survey methods landlords are deploying, and what we think you should probably be asking, bearing in mind that there's a key element of surveys is about hoovering up intel. Before I hand over to Denise, some housekeeping issues. This webinar is scheduled to last for an hour. If you've got a tech issue during the session, please use the chat function on your toolbar below at the bottom of your screen to get in touch with James. James, give him a wave. There's James. He will sort out all your wildest dreams as far as tech issues are concerned. Denise will be picking up questions as we go along. So if you've got a question for Denise, please use the Q&A function, which is also down the bottom of your taskbar. And if you could pose a written question as succinctly and to the point as possible, that would be great. And what I'll be doing is sifting through those and putting them to Denise at an appropriate time. We will be recording this, and Denise's slides will be available on the website shortly after we've finished. And that's it from me. Denise, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'll just share my screen. Are we there, Steve? Yeah, fantastic. Okay. So as I say, if you have any questions, do drop them a note in chat and Steve will pick them up. But also I've allowed time at the end to pick up on things and have a general debate if that's more useful. So without further ado, let's get going. What I've done is I just want to bring us through up to date where we are. I want to look at some of the potential questions that we think are going to be coming down the road and the timetable, and then just to add, where we are, what's been going on in the sector in the last 18 months or so, what sort of questions have been coming into surveys, and potential next steps that you might want to consider. So lots to talk about. So where are we at? Consumer regulation. I think it's really important, not to lose sight that the TSMs are just one part of the new consumer standard. The development of them is running faster than the rest because there's no legislation needed. And in November, obviously, the document was set out by the regulator in terms of the principles of their approach, which was the start of that process of consultation with a full consultation due in the next couple of weeks. And as Steve said, we had Rob, I don't know if you sat in the webinars available on our website, but he went through and confirmed the aims and the themes that are set out in the white paper and how they want to take those forward. And in particular, it was interesting, in terms of the tenant satisfaction measures, the remit, the fact that they do need to be take part under meet the statutory objectives that the regulator has. They need to be relevant. So they have to follow the themes of the white paper. They need to be accurate, which means that the questions need to be robust, people need to understand what they mean, and they need to be asked in such a way that we can all be confident that the data provided is reliable. They need to be responsive. And I think that's a key point, because the value from any survey is that you should see the value of getting in. It's not just a tick box exercise. So if they're responsive and relevant and help inform businesses, then that's a good thing. And they need to be deliverable. We need to make sure that all landlords can do this and ask the questions, and the cost shouldn't outweigh the benefits that you get from doing it. So a lot of demands on the question set. The other thing is, having worked in housing for so long, and for those of you who have, it's like, haven't we been here before? And yes, we have. I mean, we have in the past had questions. I've just put in some to throw some nightmares, if anyone remembers those BBPI ones from ages ago in the early noughties. But this is not new, having to provide very detailed, very structured method collection of questions for the regulator. And it did bring some benefits, and it was challenging. It was very more structured in the past, and we don't know yet what we're going to be asked to do, but it isn't actually anything new. And it was a good thing in terms of the sector, because we got very good benchmarking data. We had a good understanding of where you sat compared to peer group. So there was so many benefits to that. There was also challenges, and so we're back in that area in a way. I think the other thing to remember is, with all of this tenant satisfaction measures, it is not an exact science. We're not doing medical research here. This is all opinion-based research. It's what people think, and I think you've got to remember that. And I certainly think the regulator will be looking at and using this as a tool to raise questions rather than to hold people to account. It's just going to be one aspect of a value of a range of part of the consumer standards. So we're here, and this is what we're going to have to look at. So it was also interesting. I think Robex went into this a bit more detail about potential, whatever I call it, bumps in the road or bumps in the measures. And I think, what I've heard from the people working on this is very realistic and great understanding about the potential issues of trying to introduce a set of questions in the sector that will work for everybody, that will be well understood and will be wanted for everybody, and also meet the requirements of the government. So I do think there is a real issue, and how do you tackle that is going to be really interesting. I think there are lots of challenges around that. I think there's also challenges around the methodological approach to collecting surveys. We've been here before. I know most landlords have evolved how they capture and engage with their residents as part of a feedback programme, but the methodological challenges that this will bring is even more so, because in the olden days, if you remember, we did paper surveys, and then it's evolved. Most people are doing different surveys, telephone, online, or blended. So how are we going to address that? What's going to be the requirements? And that's going to be one of the interesting things that's going to come out when we see the details in a couple of weeks. And I think also, it was set out last week from Rob, they're very much aware of some of these issues around just the questions themselves, having delved in and had, as part of the consultation, developing the draft set. They've come across all the issues that we all know, the problems with right first time, the problem with complaint surveys. Should it sit in a perception survey? So you're asking everybody on a random basis, or should it actually be just to those that have gone through the process? What is a complaint? How do you define that? Do we go for formal, informal? So huge amount of challenges around that. And the white paper mentions engagement. I don't know, you can look up the definition, then you can talk to 20 people and you'll have 40 probably different definitions of what engagement means. There's no wrong answer, because it's your opinion, it's right, but it's a challenge and you're not going to get standards across that. So another challenge. Again, antisocial behaviour and neighbourhood measures very much important, but it depends what sort of landlord you are. Are you a small landlord on one estate? Are you a big city council, an ALMO, or a housing association group with scattered properties? So, you know, what is a neighbourhood, and who's responsible for antisocial behaviours will vary differently on landlord by landlord. And then the other one we've all been grappling with is health and safety. Again, how do you actually define that in a way that people will understand? And actually, what are we talking about? We know what we are talking about from the consultation, but getting that into a fit for purpose question is going to be a bit of a challenge. So what I want to do is I'm just going to take some of those themes going forward, but I also want to just show you what I'm going to be looking out for when this consultation comes out in the next few weeks. The first thing I'm really interested in is not just the questions, but how many are there going to be? I mean, in the past, we've had 2, we've had 3, we've had 5, you know, are there going to be more than that? Is there going to be 8, 10, 12, 15? There's quite a lot of topics mentioned. So it's going to be really interesting to see, you know, the load of questions that's coming in there. And not only that, but what response scales. You know, we've all been wedded for quite a long time with satisfaction and dissatisfaction. But as you know, as we go digital, numbers, you know, where are we going to have the freedom to put in 1 to 10 scales, where I'm assuming they're going to leave in the neither middle ground. But again, it's going to be interesting to see that. And that's just the questions, you know, the elements of that. In terms of survey methodology, my gut feeling, and I think it's already said, you know, there's been conversations, but, you know, the methods are going to be, there will be slightly prescriptive aspect, but I think it's going to be open, because at the end of the day, we have to make this work. But it will be interesting. You know, are all the questions going to be from asked in a perception survey, which is a random survey out to all residents, which is fine if you're doing a census, but if you've got a sample survey, or is it going to, are we going to be able to bring them from those transactional ones, like a responsive repair or a complaint survey? So again, those need squaring off. We at Acuity run a wide number of surveys. We do lots of one-offs, but we do lots of tracking surveys where we have landlords that, rather than do a survey in one go, we'll break it up into 4 sections over the year, and we'll continue to do that. Will we be okay compiling those results into one figure? Or does it need to be in an exact point in the year? You know, lots of things in there. And the frequency, you know, is it going to be an annual return, which is what we're used to? Will there be special requirements for smaller landlords? Will it be more flexible? Or will it be forcing everybody? You know, so there's some things in there I'm not too worried. I think there will be more flexibility for smaller landlords under 1,000 units. Obviously, if you know, when we've submitted data, whether it's been to, for example, Housemark in the past or Acuity benchmarking, we ask you to work within certain statistical reliability limits, sort of plus a 3%, 4%, 5%. I'm not going to go into a stats bit here, but again, what will be the requirement? Because we want the data to be comparable, so we need to get the reliability in there. So that's going to be fundamental. Are there going to be any changes to those figures that we've been working? And I think, you know, we know over so many years how many we've had to do each year. If you're a large landlord doing an annual number, or a smaller landlord doing every 3 years, you know what you've got to try and hit to get there. Is that going to change? And I think a key part also is representativeness. So it's really important that the results that come back are representative of that group. And if they're not, you know, you can be submitting false information. You know, if I'm just making it up, but if you do a postal survey, you've got half general needs, half housing for older people, and only 2 people respond back from general needs, and you get everybody back from housing for older people, it won't be representative. I'm sure your results will look fantastic, but you're probably basing decisions not having had conversations with all the residents. So people really need to grapple that. And also, we need to make sure that when the data goes in, that is evident, so we can see that we're comparing like with like, and we've got that confidence. And the last thing is, in terms of housing types, tenure or needs, you know, which groups do we need to collect this in? I suspect it will be the whole range around general needs, housing for older people, but are we bringing in supported housing? Are we talking about, you know, different rent account things, and so, you know, fixed term tenancies, affordable rent, are they all going to be in or not? So we need some clear information in terms of what's included in the surveys. My gut feeling is, given the remit, leaseholders won't be in there, but that doesn't mean they should be forgotten. So quite a lot there to think about, but that's what I'm going to be looking at, and obviously having conversations about that. So I presume I haven't got any questions because Steve's not interjecting yet.
No questions at the moment, but I'd just like to remind people that if they use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, they can pose questions to Denise. I've got a quick one for you. I know the answer to this, Denise, but guess how many pages the consultation is going to extend to? So this is the doc itself, the technical documents, including the definitions, and the technical documents about survey methodology. Have a guess how many pages?
I'd like to say less than 40, no more than
200. I'll leave that fluttering in the air, but what they did say they're going to do is issue a shortened kind of, is the term right, idiot guide, or it's an executive summary that they're going to be issuing to actually cut to the chase. But I just thought I'd just flag that up. All right, let's crack on.
Okay. I think I'll just give up at this point. Okay, well, we've all got some night reading to do or not. Okay, so what I want to do is just take you through the themes and what potential questions we could be using and be asked to. And I appreciate this is 2 weeks ahead of actually knowing what they are, but we're fairly confident we've got some good ideas in terms of what they are, and we've been piloting some of the themes as well. So just to give you a bit of feedback on those new ones. So I'm starting off at the bottom. This is the draft from the white paper, really. But the overall question with Landlord Services, it has actually been around since 1999, widely used. My gut feeling is they're not going to play around with this one. They might tweak the wording. It is a core housemark question at the moment, widely used, and it's very popular. So I can't see that this will change, and I think that's a good thing because of trends and everything. There are alternatives out there. Some, you can look at things like Net Promoter Scores, and there's also the UK CSI in terms of customer service. They've got their own index on this, but I think that this is so well ingrained in our surveys that this one hopefully will be left untampered as the key metric we often use in our surveys. And we know we've been looking at what drives satisfaction based on this question for a long time. So hopefully that one's fairly stable. So running down from the top, so lots of words. So first of all, hitting off with the big one, repairs. So from the white paper, we've got properties in good repairs. And there's a talk of two questions here. And the first one was talking about right first time. And I think from the discussions we've had with the regulator, they're aware of the complexity. And we've now got an introduction of timeliness of repair coming in. Maybe that's a recognition around the fact that actually right first time does not work. It's difficult to measure and it's not always required. So that will be a positive thing, hopefully, if that one doesn't come in, and we may get something around that. I don't know. And then the other one has been around for a long time. It was in the National Housing Federation STAR. It was, it's been benchmarked in the past as well from the regulator, which is Satisfaction and Repairs and Maintenance Survey. It is very old. It's just as old as the other one. It's not a core question by Housemark STAR at the moment. They replaced it by a transactional one, because we know there's a big difference between people who answer this question in a perception survey about the repairs and maintenance survey, and they'll be reflecting back over many years and maybe remembering the good things and also some bad things, compared to in a transactional survey where we're just asking about the last repair. And this is really important, because what I did was I went back in, and some of you will have data in here probably. So I just literally went into our system and I pulled out so this is existing 21-22 data. I just found the first 16 landlords, and I looked at the difference between what was being said in the STAR tracker, so maybe we're capturing that data quarterly, is a general perception survey, and actually, for example, a responsive repair survey where we're asking, within the week of the repair being completed or the last month, we go back in and find out whether they were satisfied. And the difference is phenomenal. Typically, we know there's a 15% difference between these two measures. Actually, what I found with these, the difference was 20%, and on average was a 20% difference between there. So we are doing, if this comes in terms of from a perception survey, the results will go down, and we're actually doing the sector a disservice, because the perception is actually most responsive repairs, and repairs made is not as good as actually on the ground. Those people that have the surveys done as a benchmarking target, I always say you should be at 90% or above on a responsive repair survey. And to be honest, most landlords that have got a good responsible service are delivering that every time. So again, there's a worry there in terms of what they're going to ask. Is it perception? So something to think about on that one. The next area, health and safety. As I think, we've said before, this is a difficult question in terms of whether people understand what you mean. Obviously, it's come from the white paper from Grenfell in terms of being able to make sure that the home people live in is safe. But when it's asked to residents, we know they don't think, it's their opinion, but they often think about other things. Maybe it's people, gangs on the street at night, or if there's been crime in the area and it's not what's been aimed at. So Housemarque, as part of their review, we introduced a question which was focused on the building that they lived in: is the home safe and secure? So it was a way around that. We know from asking this question for nearly 2 years now, it doesn't work still in the way it was intended. So just to show you, I pulled off 30 trackers we've got going on asking this question at the moment, seeing where they're sat. So satisfaction that the home is safe and secure, the average, the median, sitting about 85%, which is good. Top quartile's 88% plus. We've got some landlords who's got a rating of 95%. I know we've got quite a few in the 90s, and we've got a couple of landlords that are off that mark. So obviously there's a useful metric there in terms of where do you sit in this, and clearly what you need to look at. So there has been some value in this. We've pushed it further and asked, if you feel your home's not safe, why not? And I've looked at this before. I just pulled out a large landlord. They'd asked 600 times already this year, and only 32% of the comments were linked to safety and security. A lot more, we're picking up repairs comments, property conditions, often damp, not necessarily safety issues, neighbourhood problems, ASB, crime, whatever. So a whole plethora leads residents to say that they don't feel their home is safe. And in fact, when you look at the safety and security, what comes out, even so, we've got different things that were probably not intended to be in the question. So those 32% of comments break down like that. So there's a lot around window and door security. So there is a lot of value in this question, but it might not be answering particularly what the regulator wants. So I think that there'll be some change here. And then on to the next one, dealing with complaints. Again, this is a real thing. Is it a perception survey? So we're asking all the residents, or a sample of the residents, how are you satisfied with the way that you handle a complaint? And the blue ones below are some of the ones that we've got, going out at the live. They're in perception surveys. In a transactional survey, that will be where a case is closed. And we're asking someone who's gone through that process, were they satisfied with the handling of the complaint, the process itself? And then we know there's it's polarised in terms of whether they get the outcome they want. So it's a difficult survey, but it is one of the really added value surveys. It gives you insight in terms of if there are any issues with your service delivery. Lots of different wordings around these. Obviously, it's a big part of the white paper. There's going to be one question, maybe two, I don't know, on this. So lots of things to think about that. The only thing I would say, and again, this might be age and scepticism, Housemarque and going back before that, we have had this question in a perception survey for a very long time. It's not in too many surveys. I know they're quite often in postal surveys still. And I stick by this actually. Most landlords will score. If you say, are you on a perception survey, you know, how satisfied are you the way your landlord handles complaints, we will get a figure between 55 and 70. It's sort of like the happy sitting ground. Little bit below that may begin to raise questions, but below 40%, you know, that's where I would begin to worry. We do get some landlords that have really put a huge amount into this, and we do get figures over 70%. Where that, you know, our residents are satisfied, but I would say it's quite rare to get figures that high. If you see anyone over 80%, I've got to be honest, I don't think you can, and I would say they're gaming. They're maybe phrasing questions or discounting some surveys. I don't know, but yeah, come on, guys. So just something to think about that. So, and the other thing from this is, you know, one of the reasons it's not asked a lot is what can you do with this information? It's a perception question. Yeah, and to change the whole resident's perception, you know, is it worth investing all that time and energy and effort to have landlords that never make, you know, tenants that have never made a complaint, understand how good you are at it, you know? So it's an interesting question. But obviously it's very important, and there will be some question on this at least. Resident engagement. Whew. Okay, so the blue one. So we've got, it looks like there could be a couple of questions in there. So the first thing, what questions are they going to ask? Housemarque have got a very standard set that's been around for a very long time. The white paper listens to views and added takes notice of them. We've always used acts upon them. My thing is, if you don't tweak a question, if you're only tweaking it because you're tweaking it, why? You know, it's not a great question. People have been trying, myself included, been trying for 20 years to include this question. I will be ecstatic if they come up with something better, because many people have tried and often failed and then have left this. That's why we've still got this one around. But we are trying to unpick engagement. So it'd be interesting to see whether that actually does come in, the word engagement. At the bottom of here, I've got a couple of questions. We've very much been focusing on this. We've asked people just flat out, are you satisfied with, you know, your landlord's engagement with residents, to see where the figures are sitting. And that can come in anywhere between 60 and 90%. Depending on other satisfaction metrics. We've had landlords try to explain what engagement is to them and try and get a more useful question out. And again, you know, it's similar sort of ranges, so it's going to be interesting. And I think the other thing around all of these questions, when you're looking at the results, is the neithers. If you haven't engaged, if you're talking to a resident that hasn't engaged with you in the last 2 years, they can't answer this question. So without a no opinion, don't know, they often go for the neither. And that tends to deflate the satisfaction measure. So that's why often these figures come in the 60s and 70s, because you get this nearly 20% sat of neithers. And for me, I always look at the dissatisfaction. You know, is it down below 10%? That's fine. If is it over 10%, then maybe there is something there. So again, you know, that's going to see whether that's been taken on board. So that will be really interesting. And then neighbourhood management. I actually don't want to say a lot on this. I think, you know, they're very standard, very simple questions on all these around communal areas, are they clean and safe? We've had these in surveys, they work really well.
Denise,
yeah.
Can I just jump in there, because it's kind of specifically to do that last point you made. Rachel's asking, she'd prefer to see the neither removed entirely. What are your thoughts on this?
No, I think if you're asking if someone's satisfied with anything, I think it's absolutely valid to sit on the fence in the middle and say, well, it wasn't great, it wasn't bad. So I think the neither gives it a 5-point balanced, and we've got clients that have taken out the neither, and it increases the satisfaction and it increases the dissatisfaction. I think it's valid. I think the other thing is whether you allow a no opinion or a don't know to filter out those that don't. That's my preference on those questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, thanks for that. I don't know what Rachel thinks about that, but want to ponder that, Rachel. The other question that Rachel asked, just around the consultation, is, well, I guess the question is, will Acuity be formally responding to the consultation, which I think is definitely a yes. And here's the other thing, given its importance to Acuity's business model and its clients, will we be sharing that ahead of the deadline so that to help inform, if you like, our members' opinions?
Yeah, I think it's on my last slide actually in terms of next steps. I think we will be putting out a briefing and having conversations and maybe have another meeting or, you know, sit down virtually just to see what people think of that. Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that you, I think we talked about, Denise, but certainly I raised it at the session that we had with the regulator last week, is we're going to try and get Rob, or one of his, Rob, the regulator, or at least somebody from the RSH back, hopefully in January, so that we can get stuck into the nitty-gritty of both the proposed TSMs, but also, if you like, methodological issues. So yeah, I just simplified that. Right, over to you.
Yeah, I'll be very vocal if I'm not happy. Whether they listen, that's their prerogative. It's totally fine. So yeah, I mean, neighbourhood management. You know, we've had these in a lot of surveys. They're really, you know, in terms of communal areas, really happy with them. Steve's now run away. No, he's back. So you know, I think they're fine. They stand up. They're quite robust, clean and safe. You know, it's good. People like those wordings. So I'm quite happy with those. The only concern, and this is quite key, is that it will require filtering, because obviously not all residents have communal areas and services. So depending on your methodology, you will need to filter those questions, which is fine. And everyone says, that's fine. I can just say, if you have communal areas, to answer these questions. But we know, because we get hundreds of thousands of surveys back, even on a paper survey where it's really clear, residents will carry on ticking through. And you need those checks in at the end against actually, is that resident, when they've sent the survey back, the results, do they actually live in a home with communal areas? So I think there's filtering and cleaning coming in here that hasn't been asked for in the past. So just something to watch out for. Then this has been out, whether you have the contribution to the neighbourhood associated with the home. And I think this is one, I think the regulator is really very aware of the issues around this question and the impact it has on different sorts of landlords, not just for small landlords in terms, you know, that have distributed stock, but larger landlords. And the difference between, obviously, you know, we've got some clients that are city councils, you know, so completely asked a different way compared to some housing associations. So it'll be interesting to see how that one goes through the process. And then again, handling antisocial behaviour. I mean, we carry out quite a lot of antisocial behaviour surveys. They're very good, but I think actually it is one question that you can ask. It does sit in a perception survey as well. You know, but equally, if you're asking residents how you handle antisocial behaviour, but if they're not aware of what you do, then how can you answer the question? And how will they answer it? They'll go in the middle and they're neither. So I think there is potentially, you know, is this a good question? Is it a useful one? So it's a good idea. And obviously this question, again, just like the general perception complaints one, has been around for a long time. And I would say exactly the same. The figures just match complaints. So, you know, most people, 55, 70, if you're getting over 80% of this question, something's not right with the survey. So again, you know, it'll be interesting to see what comes out if that sort of question comes in, and whether it's any different to what we saw 5-10 years ago when there were a lot more of that. And we know quite a lot of the small landlords will have had this if you're doing a paper survey with a lot more questions, you know, they will have been in surveys. So we've got a good idea of where your scores sit in there. But again, it's coming back to that no opinion and neithers will be hitting that. Before I just finish, it's important to when I finish with the questions. Is anything missing? And I would say yes, but I think it's okay that it's missing, because as the regulator, they have a tight remit and they can only put in questions from the white paper that they've been asked to. They can't go off. But I really do feel that they are missing a trick. And that was why working with HouseSmart, we brought in Easy to Deal With, because it was an attempt to ask a customer service question. And there was a lot of research in this, and we know there's a high correlation with this question and overall satisfaction. So if you're deemed to be easy to deal with, whether that's making a complaint or reporting a repair, you will score very highly on overall satisfaction. So it's a customer service element. And I do smile that these are called tenant satisfaction measures. So we can deliver all the measures that we're asked to, but we could do it in such a grumbly way with staff that really don't care. And as Jenny Osborne said, some landlords are losing their empathy. I actually do think this is a key part of the equation. And I think it should be in your surveys, even if it's not required. And I think it links quite nicely. And I think Steve's been banging on about this since about 2011. His thing, I would ask the TSMs, but actually what is important is to find out what matters to your residents. Then deliver that service in the way that they want you to deliver it. Yeah, so find out what elements of that service are key to your residents and do it that way. And then from my point of view, go back and check you're doing it right as part of the survey. And that fundamentally is what you need to do. And I think it's really important when you're looking at surveys going forward that you take the TSMs, but you also step back and think as a business, as an organisation, and also bring tenants in and residents, what should we be asking as well? And it's fundamental. So, I think it's really important not to get just stuck on, I'd hate to see a survey just going out with the TSM questions in it.
Denise, just on that issue, and just bat me back if you're going to cover it anyway. But you're absolutely right. As I said in my preamble, I said I've just literally come out of a meeting with the RSH where they were making the point quite strongly that not enough landlords really know their tenants. And so I guess there's the profiling in terms of understanding what kind of groups their tenants might be, how they kind of reflect protected characteristics. So there's all that kind of stuff and about family makeup. But then there's this stuff about what really matters most to them. And you're absolutely right. It's stuff that I was banging on about 10 years ago, back in the days of the TSA. And we did loads of work back then with the CIH and with the regulator at the time. Have you got any kind of top tips or top ideas or if you like, the killer kind of questions that organizations might ask to start unpacking the profiling issue and the preferences?
Yeah, I don't have a killer question because I don't think there's one. I think that we have seen, and it's really interesting compared to some of our customers. Our smaller clients, they know their residents. Okay, but I would question when you get into their housing management system how up to date that is, and it's not just demographic data. Obviously, things like age and don't tend to we've got that, it's fine, but in terms of who actually is still in the household, whether there's any disability or health issues in that household at the moment. And also for me, what we're trying to do is around the communication preferences. And that's just gone into a blender at the moment because obviously with COVID and offices shut down, how do people want to communicate? So there are lots of things. And what we've seen is we're working with a number of ALMOs and city councils, and they're just being completely honest. They don't even have the telephone number for their residents. They don't know who's in their properties. So the disparity between the different landlords is interesting. And that's what it says, isn't it? You have to get closer to your residents, and depending on the landlord you are, it will depend how easy that is and whether you were there anyway.
Well, and here's the thing, even ahead of formal legislation being passed that enables the regulator to start addressing consumer issues. As part of current IDA, they're asking boards and execs now under the governance kind of guise, how do you know what your tenants want? How do you know? So they're actually able to start addressing it via that route already. So I was just thinking, just in terms of the preferencing, I mean, is there any neat questions that very simple questions that organizations can ask, like I seem to remember when I wrote a publication over 12 years ago about local metrics or designing metrics for tenants, it was about asking them which services are the most important to them, and then which aspects of those services were actually most important. You know, was it about the nature of the transaction itself, the touch point? Was it about timeliness? You know, how important was courtesy? And we were unpacking things back then. Are those things still valid?
I think that, yeah, I think you just need to change the date on that document and reissue it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do. And what we're seeing now is, in order to find out what matters, we're doing in-depth interviews with a small number of residents to unpick that. So, for example, one landlord has done brilliant research looking at the complaint service, where we went back in and did video interviews. We've done similar thing with older people to find out what matters. You need a conversation and a chat to really unpick that. So yes, there is. It's not straightforward, but it can be done quite simply as well.
Right.
Capture information.
Yes, it's not rocket science, right? Just a couple of questions whilst we've just broken the flow. Carrie's saying regarding the cleaning, I think on one of your previous slides, it was about the sort of cleaning and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you see that being filtered out? So do you see it happening before the question is asked? Are you removing non-communal households from the raw data, or within the survey itself by the questions asked?
I think that's, yeah, I mean, it depends how you're doing it. Is it a paper survey? Then you can't. Whereas if it's a telephone survey, you know, it would be very simple to do. So
right.
Depends on the methodology, I think.
So yeah, that could be either or, basically. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, just a general one from Rachel. Because you're seeing surveys from big and small alike, how do they compare? How do the smaller associations compare? Obviously, there's a vested interest here.
Well, you need to read the Acuity annual report, which gives you a comparison. Yeah, no, small. Acuity works with a higher percentage of really high performing landlords, and that's small landlords, and that's some really large groups that are phenomenal, and some middle ones, you know, 5 to 10,000 really, and by that I mean someone who's scoring north of 90% on overall satisfaction. Yes, most small landlords, as a rule, we know smaller landlords will get higher scores than larger, over 1,000. However, there are many exceptions, and there are so many, you know, there's very few very poor landlords that we work with, you know, so we've got very high results from both groups.
Yeah, and I'd concur with that. So certainly, as people know, I've sort of gone through loads of club reports with clubs up and down the country, and it is a universal phenomenon. As Denise has said, generally, satisfaction is markedly up for smaller providers compared to the bigger ones, but it actually extends beyond that. I'd say on some of the key metrics, the non-satisfaction metrics, like, you know, we're talking about, right first time, jobs, you know, done right first time, and the, if you like, the average end-to-end time of say a repair or a void, smaller associations generally tend to come up better than the bigger ones there as well. And I think it's when the white paper first came out, I didn't want to come across as being complacent, but I felt it was very much a document that was targeted at big and remote housing associations, frankly. Yeah. Denise was saying, Rachel was saying, can we provide a link to the document we were just talking about?
Steve's. Yeah, I'll make
oh, that was mine. The thing that I wrote. Yes, I'll try and find it. But I wouldn't get too distracted by the actual metrics, because obviously the regulator is going to be giving you about 24 or so metrics to be getting on with. But what's useful about that document is it takes you through the process of how you sit down with your tenants. A bit like how Denise was saying, where if you can get an interested party, a focus group, those that are interested in getting stuck into this, you sit down with them and you kind of, you can go through the process of identifying which are the most important services and which aspects of the customer experience are most important. Right.
Okay.
Back to you, Denise.
I knew we were going to wrap. So just to remind you, I think this is, just off from Rob's things, just to remind you where we are with the timetable. This is coming out before Christmas, sold 200 pages, fantastic. So we have until March to put in our views on that. In the late summer, we will be expecting to publish the final metrics and the guidance around the methodology, and that will give you 6-8 months to put systems in place before you need to start measuring these, which is from the 1st of April 2023, and that will be for the whole year, and then they won't be reported until summer 24, where they'll be reported and we won't see the results. It's almost 3 years before we will actually see that data out. So it is running, but there is this process, and that's the time. I'll do a next step thing at the end as well. Just to show you just a couple of slides just to bring in, and I've shown these before. I've got an update. Some of you might have seen these. So I've got this data going back a long way, actually to 2001 from the National Housing Federation. That was then picked up with Housemark and that's the blue figures. These are your larger landlords over 1,000. So yes, do smalls outperform large? Yes, they do. This is general needs. And the orange is from acuity benchmarking. So all the landlords that provide the scores in with under 1,000 units. So yes, what happened was, it's interesting with Housemark, and I think this is one of the real positives I see from this process, is we're going to get back to a national data set that should be reliable, and that's fallen away. I think with Housemark, I think those that submit data will and there's skepticism around, do we just put in results if they're good? So it could be overinflated. So it's going to be really interesting to see where this trend goes once we've got some more reliable data back in the mix. I would say for acuity benchmarking, the numbers that have been submitting are fairly consistent over time, so I feel more confident. The other thing that's obviously coming out of that is the impact of COVID. We were already beginning to see a fall in satisfaction in 1920, and in fact it's gone on a bit more, and it's fallen a bit more since then. In fact, I think I've missed the last one. It's 83% now for Housemark. And then the other thing, just for those, if you're a small landlord, you opt in, but we do a lot of the tracking surveys for large landlords and some small ones. So every quarter or 6 months, we'll go out and ask some very standard perception questions. And what's important, if you've not seen this, is that satisfaction, that highest figure was actually Q1 2021, and that was as COVID came in and landlords were reaching out to support residents. In fact, satisfaction went up. This is the overall Met rating. It then fell away in the summer of last year, and that was probably to do with office closures and disruption to repairs. And we were climbing out of that lower figure all through last year, even into Q1 this year. And in Q2, this is what we're slight concern. We're hoping this is an anomaly, which I can't say that word, but we had a big drop. So that's going up to September. So it would appear that dissatisfaction has fallen again, even lower than where it was during COVID and lower before we went into the pandemic. We're just obviously in the next few months we'll be wrapping up Q3, and it's going to be really interesting to see where that falls. But it's really important, if you're doing a survey at the moment, to be aware satisfaction's suppressed compared to before the pandemic, and we're seeing that across all surveys as well. So just something to bear in mind. So what's going on? What else has been going on in the last year? One of the things that's really coming is we've seen this over time. 5-10 years ago, there was a move away from postal surveys to telephone for whatever reason. Smaller landlords, if you're doing a census, less than 1,000 units, don't survey every year. Small, postal is often the best approach, but it's not the only approach. I would recommend getting a quote, or thinking about telephone. We'd do a smaller, perhaps a sample, but we can probe these. We can talk to residents, have a conversation. with them, which you won't get from a postal survey. And if anyone else fills in postal surveys and, you know, writing in those extra comments, people just don't do it. It's better to have those conversations sometime. Obviously, online's exploded. It continues to explode, and we often run them before, during, and after a one-off survey. Some people obviously just do just do surveys online. We've got problems around how many people respond, is it representative, and also the results between different survey methodologies can be different, even when you're asking the same questions. We don't at Acuity, we only do a few face-to-face interviews. It's often in supported housing. We're doing a lot more video interviews, in-depth probing and coming in. And we know text is used, but that tends to be more for the transactional surveys at the end of a repair or something like that. But the way that people use digital now is changing, and it will continue to evolve. Some people get really good response rates back to digital surveys, you know, north of 15–20%, and others struggle to get 1.5% back. So it depends on your relationship with your residents, their preferences, how you normally communicate with them as well. But it's going to be interesting to see what's asked and whether what the regulator wants and what works best for you. There might be some clash there, and you've got to think about that. So it's really important to just be aware of the pros and cons of each methodology. So that's something to think about as well. And then just very quickly, emerging questions. Obviously, you can pick these up. I don't really want to go to those this much, but what we're seeing in the last 18 months is, you know, more profiling. People do want to know what the residents think, what matters, what's important. They're all coming back in. Who's in the household? You know, what are the issues? What issues are facing you as a household? Sorts of, you know, what support's needed. We're seeing a lot of those questions coming into surveys. We're doing other surveys, as I said, we're doing these in-depth ones that are just complaints, but we've done lots of others. I've had some inquiries. I'm calling them. I haven't heard this is me. I'm calling them non-coms. So it's like rom-coms, but non-coms. So people that you don't talk to for the last 2 years. Who are they? Where are they? What's going on? And just a quick, you know, reach out. Is everything okay? So I think we might see some more surveys. That's really important, particularly if you're trying to understand who's in your homes. And the smalls, what we're trying to do at the moment is we're trying to blend perception and transactional surveys. So when we talk to someone, we capture the starter questions, but we also capture if they've had a repair in the last month or a complaint closed. So we're doing some blended piloting at the moment. In terms of emerging questions, fewer and fewer landlords are asking COVID. I think we've got about 32 landlords at least asking these questions on the right. You know, how have we responded? Is there anything we've done differently? In terms of the way we've changed our communication and offices, do you think that's a good thing? Should we continue with that? So we do see some COVID questions still in there, and we're not obviously sure with the pandemic where it's going still, but you know, they are in there and they're still in some surveys. And the ones that are emerging, I've just put on the next slide, you'll obviously get a copy, but, you know, as we know, pressure on the household is going to increase daily on the news, you know, so we're seeing questions in there trying to understand if that can help. We are going to see a lot more questions around environmental, heating, energy efficient, carbon neutral homes. So it can be linked to whether, you know, do you feel your home's energy efficient? Is your heating too expensive? Should we be focused, you know, where do we sit with carbon neutral? We've got a landlord that's just been asking, what's the most important thing to you? Your home's built to last, so it doesn't get swept away in a flood or a gale. You know, they're going to come back more and more. Is your home energy, you know, that your home's energy efficient, or that you're part of the community that promotes an healthy environment? So there's a lot more to those questions. They've just been shrunken there, but yeah, I think there's some really interesting ones there. Mental health and well-being is, you know, we're seeing more of those. Just checking on residents. I've put in there the 4 ONS ones, which they're not great, but they're still used, and you can actually benchmark that data. So I do think there's room there for some really good questions if that's what you know, it's about understanding services and support. And then customer engagement. The other thing we've been doing is I just threw this one in. This is just an example. If you wanted to ask someone about overall customer engagement, in order for them to understand what customer engagement is all about, you actually need to make sure you've explained it to them. So we've got one client that's gone in a really sneaky way and just goes and asks them everything, and then, oh, and what's the overall customer engagement score, please? Which I thought was quite an interesting approach. It's, you know, it's about getting the information you need, being kept up to date, making sure it's easy to report things, offering opportunities, great customer service, you know. So it was quite an interesting approach. So I've just thrown those in there. And then really, just to finish off, that you obviously you'll get a copy. This is the last slide. So, you know, there's lots of you've got an opportunity to take part in the consultation. We will be putting out a briefing paper, and we do want to have conversations before we submit that. Lots of talks. I'll also be talking to clients and those that do benchmarking, particularly about our current satisfaction clients, in terms of whether it's worth piloting some of those metrics that are, even although they're draft, we've been doing that anyway. I suspect we'll be moving those along. Smaller landlords, something to think about. If you survey every 2 or 3 years, and we don't know the requirements on frequency of the smaller landlords, so you might want to not do a survey next year. I don't know, did you hear market research companies say do not do a survey next year? But just make sure that if you do need to do one in 2023, you know, and you're not planning on doing one every 1 year, you may need to pause and realign to some sort of schedule. So that's something to look at. I don't know the answer on that one. Tracking surveys, this is my worry. I've got a lot of tracking clients that do between 8 and 12, 15 questions every quarter. If they throw in 12, 15, 24, but I presume some of those are performance measures, that's going to bust apart the time because they're quite short, snappy surveys. So my concern is if we're overloaded by TSMs, that might have an impact on trackers. Going into April, you can do some I would do some early testing if you're worried about some of those things. Start to have conversations with residents about, do they understand what they mean? Try and get some comms around different words that you may be asking questions on, so that they're aware of what you mean by that. And then obviously coming out, once we've got the actual TSMs, you might want to test those, you might not, you might want to wait, and then just make sure you're ready, you know, got systems in place ready for that launch in April 23. And finally, about 18 months from now, we might be able to do some benchmarking and know where you sit. So yeah, loads. Anyway, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. You'll obviously get a copy of the slides from Steve.
Nice one, Denise. Thank you. We've still got about 4 minutes or so left for questions. Rachel's just making a point about needing a number of workshops pilot to help inform the sector scorecard, which later informed the regulatory metrics. My understanding, Rachel, of the status of these TSMs when they come in is that they will, just like we've got the mandatory BFM metrics, that these will be quite important, but as Denise was saying, not the be all and end all as far as consumer regulation is concerned. And the regulator keeps banging on about this, that it's actually the standards are actually more important than these metrics. These metrics are just the proverbial can opener to help tenants and other stakeholders, as well as the regulator, get a little bit of a sense of performance, but they're not going to regulate to these metrics. They're going to be regulating to the standards. I think what's going to happen over the next 3 months, from mid-December, when this consultation comes out, is that we will formalize as many as 24 metrics. All I'd say about that is, where does that leave the sector scorecard? The sector scorecard, I can't help but think, and it'd be interesting to see what Denise's view is on this, but the sector scorecard was of its time, and it was doing a job of political management when the sector was getting a good old kick in by the government. And this was a way to be seen to be transparent as far as BFM was concerned. And then, of course, at the same time, the regulator then developed its mandatory BFM metrics. I do think there's a big question mark hanging over the sector scorecard now, because I think these metrics are likely to displace that initiative, which is now looking a bit anachronistic. But if you're saying about workshops or whatever, yeah, my plan is to get Rob, the regulator, back in January, looking at these metrics and you know, going through the nitty gritty of it, and all I can say is I can't believe that the sector scorecard can carry on sitting alongside these metrics once these metrics are instigated. I don't know what you think, Denise. Yeah, unmute.
I agree. Totally agree, Steve. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okie dokes. I think if there's no more questions, I've just got a very cheeky last question for you, Denise. On the basis that these TSMs, and then we might end up with 24 of them, 24 regulatory consumer metrics, right? The whole point about them is about transparency. But, you know, I think people will get all kind of hung up on certain things, but ultimately the point about them is transparency so that people can hold landlords to account. They might be quite difficult to navigate because all the metrics are saying different things. How sensible might it be, Denise, to suggest that an index or a special fancy sausage machine, right? You stick all the results of these 24 metrics in, you crank the handle, hey presto, out pops a magic number that tells you how good you are overall. How good or how bad an idea is that?
It's a good idea, and certainly reviews of Start and with Housemark, and we've looked at indexes ourselves. It is good. I think the black box bit, and I know Housemark looked at this again. We looked at it with Housemark a couple of years ago with the review. It's a good idea, but it has to be transparent, and everyone would have to agree how that index is calculated. To have the faith in it, and that can be the problem. And I know if you take the UK CSI as a customer satisfaction index, you know, it's black box. You don't know how it's calculated. It comes from a number of questions, but it is a meaning, you know, UK CSI, you know, your rating is used very much so. So yeah, it's an interesting idea if you can get it to work. It certainly would simplify. 24 is just ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. So the irony is, in trying to be transparent, it's not transparent.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right. I think our allotted time is now up. So in the absence of any further questions, I really hope this has been useful for everyone. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Denise, for providing quite a comprehensive canter through everything what you know. We've got one of these webinars left, which I think is scheduled next week, where we're going to be getting to grips with culture. So if you haven't, organizational culture, which again is completely pertinent to the white paper, because one of the key things that came out of the white paper was a concern that culturally housing associations are not where they need to be, particularly in terms of their attitude towards tenants. So that's the theme for the next one. Get yourself signed up for that if you haven't already done it, and hopefully see you all next week. Bye-bye, everyone.